The soft blue light of my tablet illuminated my small, quiet living room. It was a rainy Sunday evening. My name is Clara May Harrison. I am 67 years old, a widow, and for the last 40 years I have worked until my bones physically ached. I scrubbed floors in wealthy people's houses. I worked double shifts smelling like bleach and fried food at a local diner, and I wore shoes with holes in the soles. I did all of this for one single reason: to make sure my only daughter, Hope, never had to struggle the way I did. I paid for her expensive college tuition in cash. I bought her the designer clothes she begged for so she would fit in. I was sitting in my worn-out armchair, sipping a cup of cheap tea, casually scrolling through my social media feed to see if Hope had posted any updates about her busy life in the city. My thumbs stopped moving. My breath completely hitched in my throat. Staring back at me from the glowing screen was a professional, high-definition photograph of my daughter. She was wearing a breathtaking, custom-made white lace gown, holding a bouquet of expensive white roses. Standing next to her, wearing a sharp tuxedo and kissing her cheek, was her wealthy fiancé Devon. The caption underneath the photo, posted by Devon's elegant, high-society mother, read, "A truly magical weekend in the Hamptons. Welcoming our beautiful new daughter-in-law, Hope, to the family. The most perfect wedding day." I didn't drop the tablet, I just stared at it. The picture had been posted 2 days ago. My only daughter, the child I had sacrificed my youth, my health and my entire life for, had gotten married to a millionaire in a lavish high society wedding. And she hadn't just forgotten to invite me, she hadn't even told me it was happening. Welcome back to the Wise Chronicles. We are told that a mother's sacrifice is a sacred bond, an invisible string that ties a child's heart to her forever. We give them the clothes off our backs and the food from our plates, hoping that when they spread their wings, they will look back with gratitude. But what happens when the child you lifted out of poverty becomes completely ashamed of the calloused hands that lifted her? What do you do when the daughter you gave everything to decides you are too low class to be seen in her new, wealthy world? Today's story is a breathtaking, deeply emotional masterclass in absolute heartbreak, silent resilience, and rewriting your own destiny. It is the story of a working-class mother who was treated like a dirty secret, and the devastating, elegant, and completely unexpected revenge she took to reclaim her dignity. If you believe that a mother's love should never be treated as a burden, and that true class has nothing to do with money, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You do not want to miss the unbelievable true stories we share here on the Wise Chronicles. Now, let's go back to that quiet living room where a heartbroken mother stopped crying and a fiercely independent woman finally woke up. I sat in the dark for 3 hours. The tears eventually came, hot and bitter, stinging my cheeks. I looked down at my hands. They were rough, scarred, and aged from decades of harsh cleaning chemicals. And suddenly, the devastating truth completely washed over me. This wasn't a sudden oversight. This was the final piece of a puzzle Hope had been putting together for years. I thought back to the last 5 years of our relationship. Whenever Devon and his wealthy, refined family were in town, Hope would suddenly make excuses about why I couldn't come to dinner when I offered to meet Devon's parents. Hope told me they were too busy. She had systematically, deliberately walled me off from her new upper-class life. She wasn't just busy, she was utterly, profoundly ashamed of me. She was terrified that her rich new in-laws would see her working-class diner waitress mother and judge her. Most mothers in my position would have picked up the phone. They would have called their daughter screaming, crying, begging for an explanation, or demanding an apology. They would have thrown a massive guilt trip, fighting desperately to force their way into a life where they weren't wanted. But as I sat in that dark room, the tears completely stopped. I realized something incredibly powerful. I had spent 40 years begging the universe to give my daughter a better life. I had succeeded. She had her perfect life now. My job was completely, entirely done, and I refused to spend the last chapters of my life begging my own child for a crumb of her attention. I didn't call her, I didn't leave an angry comment on the photo. I simply turned off my tablet, went to sleep, and woke up the next morning as a completely different woman. For 40 years, every financial decision I made was about Hope. It was time to make a decision for Clara. My first stop was to a high-end financial advisor and a ruthless estate attorney. I had a modest home that was fully paid off, a decent pension, and a life insurance policy. For decades, my will explicitly stated that 100% of my assets would go to Hope upon my passing. I sat in the lawyer's mahogany office and completely rewrote my legacy. I want exactly 50% of my entire estate, including the proceeds from the sale of my house, to be placed into an ironclad, irrevocable trust, I told the attorney, my voice steady and cold. Upon my death, that money will be donated entirely to a local charity that provides housing and educational grants for working-class single mothers. The lawyer nodded, taking notes. And the remaining 50%, Clara. The remaining 50% goes to Hope, I said. But with incredibly strict, unbreakable conditions. She cannot access a single penny of it until she turns 50 years old. And if she attempts to contest the charitable donation in court, a clause will trigger disinheriting her completely and leaving her exactly $1. The lawyer smiled, recognizing a woman who was entirely in control of her empire, no matter how small it was. I signed the documents. The ghost of the sacrificing, weeping mother was legally banished. My next step was completely severing the physical ties to my painful past. I contacted a real estate agent and listed the house I had lived in for 30 years. Because the market was incredibly hot, it sold in exactly 12 days for entirely in cash. I packed my clothes, my favorite books, and my photo albums. Everything else, the old furniture, the painful memories, the empty bedroom that used to belong to Hope, I left behind. With the cash from the house, I didn't move into a sad, lonely apartment. I moved to the coast. I bought a beautiful, sun-drenched, luxury condominium in a vibrant, upscale residential community designed specifically for active, older adults. It had a massive swimming pool, lush gardens, a private clubhouse, and a community of people who were actually living their lives, not just waiting to die. The transformation I underwent over the next 6 months was absolutely breathtaking. Freed from the heavy, suffocating burden of waiting by the phone for a daughter who was ashamed of me, I began to truly live. I used my money to buy beautiful, elegant clothes that fit me perfectly. I got my hair professionally styled. I joined a knitting club where we drank expensive wine and laughed until our ribs ached. I even signed up for weekly ballroom dancing lessons, gliding across the hardwood floors with retired doctors and professors who treated me with absolute respect and admiration. I wasn't Clara, the exhausted cleaning lady, anymore. I was Clara, the vibrant, independent, beautiful woman. Meanwhile, my phone remained entirely silent. Hope didn't call me for Thanksgiving. She didn't call me for Christmas. She was too busy playing the wealthy socialite in the city. It took exactly 8 months for Hope to realize I was completely gone. It started when she finally decided to fulfill her duty and drive down to my old house to drop off a belated birthday card. She found a completely different family living there. Panicked, she called my old landline. It was disconnected. She finally called my cell phone. I was sitting by the resort pool, wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat, reading a novel, when my phone rang. I saw her name on the screen. I let it ring 3 times before I calmly answered, "Hello, Hope." Hope's voice was frantic, tinged with completely fake panic. "Mum, where are you? I went to the house and strangers are living there. Why didn't you tell me you moved? I've been so worried." "You haven't called me in 8 months, Hope," I said, my voice incredibly calm, lacking any anger or resentment. "I sold the house. I moved." "Moved where?" "Mum, you can't just disappear. Devon and I need to know where you are. We wanted to invite you to the city for a quick lunch next week." She was lying. She just wanted to make sure I wasn't homeless and about to become a financial burden on her wealthy husband. "I'll text you the address," I said simply, and hung up the phone. 2 days later, Hope's expensive silver Mercedes pulled through the gated entrance of my luxury residential community. I was sitting in the grand lobby of the clubhouse, wearing a beautiful silk blouse, sipping a sparkling water, having just finished my ballroom dance class. Hope walked through the glass doors. She was wearing designer clothes and carrying a $5,000 handbag. But when she saw me, she completely froze in her tracks. She expected to find a broken, weeping, lonely old woman living in a depressing retirement home. Instead, she was looking at a glowing, elegant, deeply happy woman who looked 10 years younger. "Mum," Hope whispered, completely stunned as she walked over to my table. You look incredible. How did you afford to live here?" "I sold the house, Hope," I said, gesturing for her to sit down across from me. I took the money I spent my entire life saving for you, and I spent it on myself. Hope's face flushed red with instant embarrassment and defensiveness. Mom, I know you're probably mad about the wedding. I'm sorry. It was just Devon's family is very particular, and it was a very small, exclusive guest list. I didn't want you to feel out of place or uncomfortable around those kinds of people. She was still doing it. She was still trying to gaslight me, pretending her shame was actually an act of protection. I looked directly into my daughter's eyes. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. My voice was as steady and unbreakable as titanium. Hope, I said softly, I am not angry about the wedding. I am actually incredibly grateful for it. It was exactly the wake-up call I needed. Hope looked confused. What do you mean? I mean that I spent 40 years breaking my back so that you could stand tall, I continued, leaning forward slightly. I scrubbed toilets so you could wear silk, and you repaid me by deciding I wasn't good enough to sit at your table. You treated me like a dirty little secret you had to hide from your rich husband, Mum. That's not true. Hope protested, tears finally welling in her eyes as her guilt caught up with her. It is true, Hope, and we both know it, I said, entirely unfazed by her tears. But here is the reality. I love you. I will always love you because you are my daughter. But I will no longer accept being an afterthought. I will no longer accept being treated as a burden or an embarrassment. My job as your mother is done. You have the life you wanted. And now I am going to have the life I deserve. I stood up from the table, picking up my purse. You don't need to hide me any more, Hope, I said, looking down at her one final time. Because I am no longer waiting in the shadows for you. I wish you and Devon a beautiful life. But my door is locked. I am choosing my own happiness, my dignity, and my peace. Goodbye, Hope. I turned around and walked out of the clubhouse toward the sun-drenched pool, leaving my daughter sitting alone at the table, completely weeping into her expensive handbag. Realizing that in her desperate attempt to gain a wealthy family, she had completely and permanently lost the only woman who had ever truly loved her. That was 2 years ago. I am now 69. I am in the best shape of my life. I have traveled to Paris with my new friends. I am the treasurer of the community knitting club, and I sleep perfectly soundly every single night. Hope occasionally sends letters begging for me to come visit her massive mansion, telling me how much she misses her real mum. I read them, I smile, and I put them in a drawer. I forgive her, but I will never allow her to shrink my world again. We are taught that parents must endure endless disrespect from their grown children simply because of blood. But unconditional love does not mean unconditional access. When the child you raised decides that your sacrifices are an embarrassment, you do not beg them for a seat at their table. You build your own table, you wear your best dress, and you let them watch you thrive from the outside. You choose your peace, your dignity, and your absolute independence. What would you have done if you found out your daughter hid her wedding from you because she was ashamed of your working class background? Would you have confronted her in anger, or would you have silently sold your house and lived your best life like Clara did? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one of them. If this deeply emotional story of a mother's ultimate dignity, fierce independence, and absolute grace made you cheer, please hit that like button and share this video. And be sure to subscribe to the Wise Chronicles for more incredible, true stories of survival, absolute justice, and rewriting your own ending. Thank you so much for listening. Always protect your peace, and I will see you in the next one.